FYF Sports, man, it's Lamont, man. We back with another player comparison video, man. As you guys already know, man, we're taking the top players from this era and the top players of the 90s, and we're comparing the top players of each position. And as you already can see today we're going to be discussing the power forward position, man. Before we get started, make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe, hit that notification bell if you have not done so already. Again, a lot of you guys reach out to us and ask us about certain topics, certain videos, and we've already dropped those videos. The only way you can stay on top of all the videos that we drop is you hit the notification bell along with the subscribe button. That way, whenever we drop a video, you'll be notified. You can stay up to date with everything that we drop. We drop a lot of information. We drop a lot of types of unique content. You don't want to miss out on everything that's coming out of FYF Sports. But today, man, we got the two top power forwards of this era, and we have the top power forward from the 90s. Not really much debate to this particular issue right here. Karl Malone was definitely the best power forward of the 90s. A lot of good to say about him. I got some bad things to say about him. And then we got Tim Duncan. Definitely the best power forward of this era by far. It's not even close. Best winner, best player. Just could do it all on the court. But as you already know, we're going to give a really quick breakdown of each particular player. And as soon as we break down each player, we're going to run down the stats. And then we're just going to, at least I'm going to come to my conclusion on who I feel is the top player of the two. Now, so far, we've already reviewed the top point guards from the 90s era and the top point guard from this era. We had Steph Curry and John Stockton. Steph Curry edged out John Stockton in that particular one. So right now, this era is up 1-0. Point guards beat out a top point guard of this era beats out the top point guard of the 90s. And unless we're going to see how this pans out right here with this typical debate right here. Now, before we get started, if you haven't watched the other video, the way I break down these players and the way I come to my conclusion is what I use is I use the 90s fan train of thought. Now, what I mean by that is when we compare players like LeBron James to Michael Jordan, what's the number one thing that we say separates Michael Jordan from LeBron James? It's the 6-0 in the NBA Finals. So the number one category above everything, the one thing that's going to weigh most heavily when I judge these players is not going to be stats alone, because we can't use stats alone when we're judging LeBron and Mike, right? Because if that's the case, then LeBron is going to blow past Jordan in a lot of statistical categories. So we can't be biased. We have to use the same criteria. So what is going to be weighed most heavily is your success, your ability to win, your ability to win championships. And so and now we use that in conjunction with your stats, and then we'll see where we're at the end of the day. But we're going to go ahead and switch over to the screen. We're going to go ahead and break down the first player up, which is Karl Malone, man. Karl Malone, easily the greatest power forward of the 90s. Man, this guy was an offensive genius. Along with, as soon as Jerry Sloan came to Utah, he was able to continuously run that pick and roll, and they made it famous with John Stockton. Though that combo right there they were great. Now, I'm not going to say they were unstoppable, because with regards to winning championships, they didn't win any championships. So they weren't necessarily unstoppable. They were definitely a great duo. My biggest knock on John Stockton and Karl Malone primarily is because when you look at the point guard position and when you look at the power forward position, you had two of the top players. So you had the best point guard in the 90s, and you essentially had the best power forward in the 90s, and your team was not able to win one championship. So I have to hold that against Karl Malone and John Stockton, because whenever you have that much talent on one team, especially in the 90s, when you're talking about the 90s, you're talking about an era that's extremely thinned out. Teams weren't loaded with superstars like that. All right, it was rare in the 90s that you'll find the top point guard and the top power forward on the same team. And to have that much talent, to have a great coach, to have a great surrounding cast, and you're still not able to win one single championship, I have to hold that against you. I have to hold that against you heavily, because you weren't able to get the job done. That's why you play the game. You play the game to win championships. You don't play the game to accumulate and amass a bunch of stats that don't really mean anything. So we have to hold that against Karl Malone. But at the end of the day, Karl Malone, great rebounder, definitely a great scorer, especially on the low post. Definitely a great scorer off the pick and roll. And I'm not going to say he was a great passer, because obviously John Stockton was a facilitator on that team. But Karl Malone, probably one of the most fierce competitors out there. This guy came out and played night in, night out. He was an Iron Man, played a lot of games, played through injuries. He actually just didn't get hurt very much at all. Really athletic, as you can see right here from a lot of these highlights. Just extremely athletic, extremely gifted player. So we can't take his offensive ability away from him. As Karl Malone went down as the NBA's all-time leading scorer. So I mean, obviously, when you can score the ball like he does, you know, your team's always going to have an opportunity to win. It's just hard for me to understand why this duo was not able to win a championship even when Michael Jordan retired. Because at the end of the day, you had the best point guard and the best power forward on the same team in the 90s era that was admittedly already thin across the league. This is something that they should have got done. That's one of the biggest knocks that I have on Karl Malone. All right, now we're just going to go ahead and we're going to go over to Tim Duncan, man. Tim Duncan, man. I mean, what can you really say bad about Tim Duncan, man? Whether you needed him to drop 30, he could go out and give you 30. You know, if you needed him to give you 15 rebounds, he gave you 15 rebounds. And I think the versatility of Tim Duncan is what not only helped make him great, but is also what helped make the Spurs great. Because he didn't have to go out and drop 30 every night, right? His role was based on what was needed to help the team win, right? If the team needed him to be a facilitator from the high post, he could be the best facilitator at the power forward spot in the league. If the team needed him to be a scorer, he can dominate his matchup and give you 30, 35, 40 points if necessary. If the team needed him to go inside and play center and collect rebounds, Tim Duncan was able to move to that center spot and go amass rebounds and be a big man on the low block. The best thing about Tim Duncan was his selflessness. He did not play for numbers. You could tell that. He did not play for himself. He didn't play for accolades. He's purely played to win championships. And he was the primary reason why the Spurs were able to maintain dominance for so long of a stretch. So again, when we're talking about Tim Duncan, he's a Mr. Do-It-All. One of the most versatile power forwards. And I think he gets that over Karl Malone right there, just because he was able to do so many things so well. And that's not just off on the offensive end. Defensively, he wasn't a pushover as well. Defensively, this man could play. He could guard threes, he could guard fours, he could guard fives. He understood how to guard the pick and roll. He understood how to outsmart younger players. Even though there were a lot of players who were faster, more athletic, he understood how to break down and beat each player. Even when he was matched up against Shaq, he understood how to overcome Shaq on the low post. When he was matched up, as we saw right there, against Carl Landry, younger players, he understood how to take advantage of some younger players. So again, I really, really respect Tim Duncan's game and how he was able to break down the power forward position to a science. And it wasn't just about being great at one thing. When we talk about Karl Malone, we focus on his ability to score. Tim Duncan was simply a master of all trades. Not only could he give you 30, sometimes he would sacrifice his scoring to be great in other areas. And I love that in Tim Duncan. Now, as we always do, we gotta go. We here's the drawing board, you guys. Man, this is gonna tell it all right here. Again, we break down everything. We don't just go with overall stats. We like to focus on averages, playoff totals, and then accomplishments, accolades, things of that nature. Obviously we want to start here. The one single stat that's going to be separating Tim Duncan from Karl Malone are going to be championships. Tim Duncan 5 NBA championships, Karl Malone 0. And why is this right here is the most disparaging thing against Karl Malone in this particular argument, because Karl Malone played on a great Utah Jazz team. Not only did he play on a great Utah Jazz team, he played with the best point guard in the NBA at the time. They had two of the best players in the NBA on their team. In the 90s, when you have two of the best players in the NBA on your team, generally equates to a lot of success, a lot of trips to the finals. You know, when we look at the Rockets when we made their run, Hakeem was able to get his team to the finals by himself. When we look at Gary Payton and Sean Kemp, they were able to get there, although they didn't get it done. But we never considered Sean Kemp the top power forward in the league. And it was arguable if Gary Payton was the best point guard in the league. He was right up there with Stockton. So the biggest knock against Karl Malone is this man had 0 championships in his NBA career, and he played on a great team in the 90s. Again, that's going to be the biggest and most disparaging thing against Karl Malone. With all the stats that he put up, with all the great stat lines, at the end of the day, all of those points are essentially meaningless because you did not equate to anything tangible such as championships, and that's why you play the game of basketball. And again, when we're looking at it from the perspective of 90s fans, what do 90s fans say about Mike over LeBron James? Mike 6-0 in the finals. LeBron 3-6 in the finals. So you have to respect this particular standpoint because winning championships matters, and even for 90s fans, it's the most important thing. You know, you cannot bring up stats when you're talking with 90s fans because again, if you try to bring up stats in that particular conversation with LeBron and Mike,
looks like you lost another one.
They're going to say the stats are meaningless because it didn't equate to the championships. And that's a very good argument. I like that concept. So we're going to stick to using that particular concept right here. So Tim Duncan, 5 championships, Karl Malone, none. They both played 19 NBA seasons. So what I like about this right here is, unlike the point guard debate where the one point guard was still playing, both of these guys have ended their career. Both played 19 years, which is pretty much even. Both of them were in the playoffs for about the same amount of times. Karl Malone never missed the playoffs, 19 times in the playoffs. And then All-Star games, Tim Duncan 15, Karl Malone 14. So I like the fact that it's even right down the middle, and both players are currently retired. All right, so we're gonna go to honors and awards. Honors and awards right here. Now we got season MVPs. They both have 2 MVPs. Both great players. Both really, really dominant seasons. Now there was one MVP that was questionable, one where everybody felt Michael Jordan should have won it over Karl Malone. Again, that's debatable, and we're not here to argue that right here. He won it fair and square, so we're gonna give it to him. So you see, MVPs is right there. Finals MVPs. This is what separates the two. Tim Duncan, 3 Finals MVPs. Tim Duncan, 3 Finals MVPs. That means not only did he get there, but he got the job done. Karl Malone was in the finals twice, back-to-back years. Not only was he in finals twice, back-to-back years, but he was in the finals against a Bulls team that didn't have particularly good bigs, defensively or offensively. Would have loved to see him and John Stockton be able to find a way to win one of those series. He was unable to get it done. 0 Finals MVPs. They're essentially the same. With regards to all NBA teams, that's going to be a wash. These were great players. Karl Malone was great across the board in the 90s, although he never won anything. But it's just individually, they were going to make first teams. They were going to be great. Longevity is always there. Now, Tim Duncan, this is what kind of separates them. This is what separates them. Early on in Karl Malone's career, he was a defensive beast. His athleticism, his energy got him on the defensive first team 3 times. Tim Duncan was consistently a great defender. He was all NBA defensive first team 8 times. But for the majority of Tim Duncan's career, which is 15 years, he was on an all defensive team in the NBA. 15 years. We got the superior defender right there, Tim Duncan. So not only are we talking about the superior winner, but so Tim Duncan so far is the superior winner, he's a superior defender. And then also Rookie of the Year went to Tim Duncan as well. So we're just going to go to stats. Stats per game. Tim Duncan, 19 points a game. Karl Malone, 25. Definitely give Karl Malone the edge offensively. He was a superior offensive player. although the Utah Jazz made him the focal point of that offense, they went to him time and time again. You got to give Karl Malone credit. His ability to score the ball face up, off the pick and roll, on the low post. He could essentially do it all. Rebounds is about even. Tim Duncan slightly ahead of Karl Malone. Again, Tim Duncan he's able to adapt. He could play the center position as well as the power forward position. But slight edge there for Tim Duncan as far as getting rebounds. When we talk about assist, again, this is going to be a wash. This is really going to be a wash. I would say that Tim Duncan's the slightly better passer. When they needed him to be a great playmaker, he was a great playmaker. Karl Malone could make the pass from the high post, but not necessarily known for his passing. He was more so known for his high turnover numbers, especially passing out of the high post. So he did pass out of the high post a lot, and he got some assists out of it. But when you look at his assist to turnover ratio, it just doesn't balance out right. Karl Malone, I think he's like top 5 in the NBA to most turnovers all time. And that was due to his inability to pass the ball effectively. Steals per game, Karl Malone 1.4, Tim Duncan 0.7. Essentially a wash right there. Those numbers are a bit deceptive. Tim Duncan was the far superior defender. Tim Duncan 2.2 blocks a game, Karl Malone 0.8. Karl Malone was never really known as a shot blocker for whatever reason, even though he was extremely athletic. But again, defense is something that you have to want to do. We know Karl Malone wanted to play offense. He was great at it. I don't know if Karl Malone wanted to play defense, which is one of the reasons why he wasn't really great at playing defense. We got total stats right here. Karl Malone just went down as one of the best scorers in NBA history. We cannot take that away from Karl Malone. 36,000 points. Tim Duncan, 26,000 points. Again, that's a very good number. But remember, when we're talking about Tim Duncan, he was a master of all trades. He wasn't just good at everything. He was great at a lot of things. So Tim Duncan scored when you needed to, but he also did other things when needed as well. But Karl Malone does get the edge scoring-wise. Total rebounds. Tim Duncan, remember, they played the same amount of years. He has 1,000 more rebounds than Karl Malone. He's definitely the better rebounder. With regards to assists, Karl Malone has more assists than Tim Duncan. But like I say, I still consider them practically even in that particular category. Karl Malone had a lot more touches. The offense ran through him and John Stockton a lot more. But Tim Duncan's role changed up so much. Sometimes he needed to be a passer. Sometimes he needed to be a defender. Other times he needed to be a scorer. Karl Malone's role really never changed while he was in Utah. Total steals. Again, these steals numbers are very, very deceptive. Karl Malone with 2,000 steals in his career. Tim Duncan with 1,000. Again, you look at these numbers right here, and these steal totals will lead you to believe Karl Malone was really good defender. That's not necessarily the case. It's a very deceptive number right here. Tim Duncan was the far superior defensive player. Do not let these numbers fool you right here. When we go to blocks, obviously the block category, Tim Duncan has 2,000 more blocks than Karl Malone. Better shot blocker, just better moving his feet, better contesting centers and power forwards down there on the low post. In total games, Tim Duncan played fewer games than Karl Malone, but that's essentially even right there. All right, now we're just going to move on to percentages. I love doing percentages because, again, percentages tell a lot as well with regards to your consistency. Now, both of these guys' numbers are going to look pretty much the same. From the field, they both shot about 50%. Karl Malone, I like that 51%, especially because he shot so many shots. So for him to shoot the ball so many times per game and he still was able to shoot 51% from the field, that's extremely great. But we know offensively Karl Malone was a monster. 3-point line, they were both pretty bad. So that's a wash right there because neither one was a serious 3-point shooter. Free throw percentages. For whatever reason, Tim Duncan struggled from the free throw line. He struggled mightily. Extremely odd because the man actually was a really good shooter, especially with that the mid-range shot off the glass. So, again, I think free throw shooting in the NBA is all mental. I just think once he started to struggle, it's just something that carried on throughout his career. Karl Malone, not really much better from the free throw line, 74%. He was known to make big free throws in big situations, so I really can't take that away from him. I just think that it was just something he was just average at. All right, so when we look at their best seasons, Karl Malone's best season is 1990, 31 points a game. Tim Duncan, his best season, 25 a game in 2002. Rebounds a game, 12.9. And again, as you can see, everything is pretty much consistent down the line here. Karl Malone is a bit ahead of him in some of these other categories. But again, even in some of these categories, especially the defensive categories, can be very much misleading. Defensively, these two players were not close. Tim Duncan was the far superior defensive player. I don't really like looking at the stats in this particular situation regarding these two players, because the eye test and understanding the game of basketball will simply tell you that defensively, Tim Duncan was just far superior. All right, now we got playoff stats, and these playoff stats are big right here because what Tim Duncan was able to do in the playoffs, he just had more success. He had a lot more success in the playoffs. He got to the finals a lot more. When you look at that Utah Jazz team from 1990, I would say, to about 1998, they had great teams in Utah, and they were only able to make the NBA Finals 2 times. Now, Tim Duncan, 20 points a game in the playoffs. Karl Malone, 24. Tim Duncan obviously has the edge in a number of these other categories, especially rebounds and blocks. But in the playoffs, stats aside, the biggest difference between these two was the fact that Tim Duncan just had more success in the playoffs. He knew how to win games. It wasn't about just filling up one particular stat category. He did whatever his team needed to do in any particular series to win that series. If it meant sacrificing his points to go defend, if it meant sacrificing his points to be a playmaker, he was able to do what needed to be done to win. And unfortunately for Karl Malone, his game was pretty much consistent. He wasn't able to change his game up and be a defender when needed. He wasn't able to change his game up and be a playmaker when needed to get through certain series. And this is one of the major reasons why you saw the Utah Jazz have so many failures in the playoffs, which have ultimately led to Karl Malone having 0 NBA championships. All right, and then their percentages in the playoffs, as you can see right here, pretty much the same as the regular season, pretty much a wash right there. So it's not going to surprise you so much. Karl Malone's best playoff series, 30 points a game in 1989. Tim Duncan, 27.6. But as you can see right here, 27.6. That's 7 points higher than his actual average in the playoffs. Why? Because again, in this particular series, they may have just needed Tim Duncan to be the scorer of that series. There are other series where he's did less. And then everything else is pretty much a wash. And as I said before, I really don't even like looking at the defensive categories when I'm comparing these two players, because at the end of the day, we know that Tim Duncan was the far superior defensive player. The overall steal numbers and averages will be a bit deceptive. Karl Malone was not a great defender, especially going into the mid-90s towards the end of his career. He just kind of lost a step, and his primary focus was just scoring the basketball. All right, now we've broken down all of those things, man. Now we have to come to a decision. Who was the better player, man? Who was the better player? Well, Karl Malone was the better offensive player as far as scoring the ball. All right, but Tim Duncan was no slouch offensively either. He could score the ball when needed, and he could be dominant at scoring the ball when needed. More versatility, I would have to give that to Tim Duncan. Tim Duncan was the better rebounder. Tim Duncan was the better defender. Tim Duncan had the better assist to turnover ratio. Tim Duncan was the better passer. So, and again, those are just individual stats. At the end of the day, I still have Tim Duncan edged out right there before we even talk about championships. But Tim Duncan with 5 championships, Karl Malone 0 championships. Karl Malone does not get any passes on the championship side of things because he played with a Hall of Fame player alongside of him. He played with a Hall of Fame coach. He had everything that he needed in the 90s to win at least one championship, and they failed to do so. And they failed to do so even when Jordan was out the league. So there's no excuses for Karl Malone right there. I have to give the edge to Tim Duncan as the best power forward of the two. And then I haven't even mentioned this, but this is one of the reasons why Tim Duncan goes down as the greatest power forward of all time. Tim Duncan goes down as the greatest power forward of all time. Why? It's his championships, his ability to win that pushes him over the edge with some of these other players. So again, I love to use the consistent premise that 90s players use when comparing Jordan and LeBron. It's the championships is what pushes certain players over the edge. And in this particular case, Tim Duncan is the far superior player to Karl Malone. He's the better winner. He's the better overall player. He's the better overall defender. He's the better teammate. He's the better leader. So that's why we have Tim Duncan over Karl Malone. All right, so there we have it right there. So far, we have Steph Curry over John Stockton for point guards. We have Tim Duncan over Karl Malone for power forwards. So right now, this particular era right now, they're 2-0 on the 90s. 2-0 on the 90s. The thing is, for the 90s, hey, if this era gets one more win, they win out in this argument. They win out. They'll win 3-2. So again, next up, we're going to be doing small forwards. We will be doing small forwards next. I got to break down this list. I got to see who the best small forward of the 90s was, and I got to break it down, and I got to compare it. I got to compare it to our era, and we'll just kind of go from there. We'll break it down. I know it's going to get tougher. These battles are going to get a little bit closer, but as it stands right now, our era is up 2-0 on the 90s with regards to having the best players per position. Again, next up is small forwards. Make sure you guys let me know what you think about this list right here. Do you agree? Do you agree Tim Duncan's the best power forward of all time? Do you think he's better than Karl Malone? If you don't agree, let me know. Hit me up in the comments. But as it stands now, I got Tim Duncan over Karl Malone. FYF Sports, man, another great player comparison video. We'll be back with more sports news, more player comparisons, more reactions. That's all going to be coming soon. So just stay in tune. Make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. It is FYF Sports, and we out.